Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Wait tonight, bets are off. I'm gonna find my way tonight. Wait tonight, won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me?
Okay, hello. Hopefully that everything's working. This is my first attempt at using, well, actually my second attempt at using OBS for streaming. I think I got everything straightened out, um, but we'll see. Let me know if something is messed up. So, we're going to read chapter 2 of um, The Lost Tribe of the Sith Precipice, which is just like a novella. It's 4 chapters. So, um, and before I get started, on Wednesdays, I'm actually going to be starting something different. I normally do a Star Wars reading. I will still be reading Star Wars, but I'm going to start reading short stories, starting with uh, Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina, I think. This is by request. People who want to listen, but they don't want to come in the middle of a story. They'd rather just have like single session stories, like the short stories and the Tales of the Bounty Hunters, Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina, that sort of thing. So I'm going to dedicate Wednesdays to that, starting this week. But um, that's the only thing new that I can think of. So let's get into the book. Chapter 2. Omen's permanent crew came from the same human stock as Corson, the debris of a noble house launched skyward centuries before in the whirlwind that formed the Tapani Empire. The Sith had found them and found them useful. They were skilled in commerce and industry, all the things the Sith Lords needed most but never had time for with their world building and world destroying. His ancestors ran ships and factories and ran them well, and before long, mingling their blood with that of the Dark Jedi, the Force was in his people too. They were the future. They couldn't acknowledge it, but it was obvious. Many of the Sith Lords were still of the crimson-hued species that had long formed the nucleus of their following, but the numbers were turning, and if Naga Sato wanted to rule the galaxy, they had to. Naga Sato, tentacle-faced, Dark Lord and heir to ancient powers. It was Naga Sato who had dispatched Omen and Harbinger in search of lignin crystals. Naga Sato who needed the crystals on Kirik to defeat the Republic and its Jedi. Or was it the Jedi and their Republic? It didn't matter. Naga Sato would kill Commander Corson and his crew for losing their ship. Sela was right about that much. Yet Sato need not lose the war. Depending on what Corson did now, he still had something, the crystals. But the crystals were high above at the moment. It had been a night of horrors, getting 355 people down from the lofty plateau. 16 injured had died along the way, and another 5 had tumbled into the darkness from the narrow ledge that formed the only apparent way up or down. No one doubted that evacuation had been the right call, though. They couldn't stay up there, not with the fires still burning and the ship precariously perched. The last to leave the ship, Corson had nearly soiled himself when one of the proton torpedoes had disengaged from the naked tube, tumbling over the precipice and into oblivion. By sunrise, they'd found a clearing halfway down the mountain, dotted with wild grasses. Life was everywhere in the galaxy, even here. It was the first good sign. Above, Omen continued to burn. No need to wonder where above them the ship was, Corson thought. Not while they could follow the smoke. Now, walking back into the afternoon crowd, less an encampment than a gathering, Corson knew he never need wonder where his people were either. Not while his nose worked. Now I know why we keep the Massassi on their own level, he said to no one. Charming, came a response over his shoulder. I should say they are not very happy with you either. Ravelin was a red Sith, pure-blooded as they came. He was quartermaster and keeper of the Massassi, the nasty, lumbering bipeds that the Sith prized as instruments of terror on the battlefield. At the moment, the Massassi didn't seem so formidable. Corson followed Ravelin into the fiendish circle made even less pleasant by the stench of vomit. Florid monsters 2 and 3 meters tall sprawled on the ground, heaving and coughing. Maybe some kind of pulmonary edema, Sela said, passing around purified air canisters salvaged from an emergency pack. Before connecting with Devore and securing a place on his team, she'd been a battlefield medic, though Corson couldn't tell from her bedside manner, at least with Massassi. She barely touched the wheezing giant. We're no longer at elevation, so this should subside. Probably normal. To her left, another Massassi hacked mightily and mutely regarded the result, a handful of dripping scar tissue. Corson looked at the quartermaster and asked, Is that normal? You know it's not, Ravelin snarled. From across the clearing, Devore Corson charged in, shoving his son into Sela's hands before she was done wiping them. He seized the brute's massive wrist, looking for himself. His eyes flared at his brother. But Massassi are tougher than anything. Anything they can punch, kick, or strangle, Corson said. An alien planet, however, was an alien planet. They hadn't had time to do a bioscan, and all the equipment was high above. Devore followed Sela back away from the sickly Massassi. 80 of the creatures had survived the crash. Corson learned that Ravelin's assistants were burning a third of those survivors, even then, over the hillside. Whatever unseen thing it was on this planet that was killing the Massassi, it was doing it quickly. Ravelin showed him the stinking pyre. They're not far enough away, Corson said. For whom? Ravelin responded. Is that depression a permanent camp? Should we remove to a different mountain? Enough, Rav. No witty comeback? I'm surprised. You at least planned that far ahead. Corson had fenced with Ravelin on earlier missions, but now wasn't the time. I said enough. We've surveyed below. You saw it. There's nowhere to go. There were beaches at the bottom of the bluff, but they terminated against the oily cliffs that began the next mountain in the chain, and going farther along the chain meant trips through tangles of razor-sharp brambles. We don't need an expedition. We're not staying. I should hope not, Ravelin said, his own nose turned by the smell of the fires. By your brother, I mean. Captain Corson's other son feels we shouldn't wait to return. Yaru Corson stopped. I have the transmitter codes. It's my call to make. He looked up at the second, more distant, smoky plume far above. When it's safe. Yes, by all means, when it's safe. The commander hadn't wanted Devore on the mission. Years earlier, he had been relieved when his half-brother had abandoned a naval career, drifting into the Sith's mineralogical service. Power and riches were more easily had there, searching for gems and force-imbued crystals. With their father's sponsorship, Devore had become a specialist in using plasma weapons and scanning equipment. The recent conflict with the Jedi found him in high demand and assigned with his team to Omen. Corson wondered whom he'd played a joke on to deserve that. He'd been told Devore officially answered to him, but that would have been a first. Not even Sith Lords were that powerful. You should have kept us in orbit. We were never in orbit. Corson recognized the voice of the navigator, Marcom, coming from over the dusty rise. He already knew the other one. The old man was trying to push his way out of the crowd when Corson topped the hill at a full run. Devore's miners weren't letting Boyle go. You don't know my job, he yelled. I did all that I could. Oh, what's the use of talking to... Just as Corson reached the clearing, the crowd surged forward, as if pulled down a drain. One sickeningly familiar crackle followed another. No! Corson saw the lightsaber first, rolling toward his feet when he breached the crowd. His father's old helmsman lay ahead, gutted. Next to Sela and Jared stood Devore, his lightsaber glowing crimson in the lightning shadows. The navigator attacked first, Sela said. The commander gawked. What difference does it make? Corson charged into the center, lifting the loose lightsaber into his hand with the force. Devore stood his ground, smiling gently and keeping his lightsaber burning. His dark eyes had a wild look, a familiar one. He was shaking a little, but not from fear. Not fear Yaru Corson could feel. The commander knew it was something else, something more dangerous. He turned Marcom's unlit weapon tip down and shook it. That was our navigator, Devore. What if the star charts don't work? I can find our way back, Devore said smartly. You'll have to, Corson grew conscious of the mix around him. Gold-uniformed miners in the circle. Yes, but the bridge crew, too. A red-faced Sith, not Ravelin, but one of his cronies. He was undeterred. This is not going to do any good, any of you. We wait here until it's safe to return to the ship. That's all. Sela straightened, emboldened by the supporters around. When will it be safe? In days? Weeks? Her child wailed. How long must we last until it's safe enough for you? Corson stared at her and breathed deeply. He threw Marcom's lightsaber to the ground. Tell Ravelin there's one more for the pyre. As a begrudging crowd gave him room to exit, he said, We go when I say. That ship blows up or tips into the ocean, and we really will have problems. We go when I say. The world spun. As Corson stepped backward, Gloyd stepped forward, keeping a wary yellow eye on the grumbling masses. He'd missed the fun. Commander? They looked past each other, watching Sith in all directions. Not really happy here, Gloyd. Then you'll want to hear this, the hulking Hook rasped. As I see it, we've got three choices. We get these people off this rock in whatever will fly, or we look for cover and hide until they all kill one another. What's the third choice? Gloyd's painted face crinkled. There isn't one, but I figured it'd cheer you up if you thought there was. I hate you. Great. You'll make someone a fine Sith someday. Corson had known Gloyd since his first command. The Hook was the kind of bridge officer every Sith captain wanted, more interested in his own job than in taking someone else's. Gloyd was smart to spare himself the trouble, or maybe he just loved blowing things up too much to want to leave the tactical station. Of course, with that station left roughly a kilometer up the mountain, Corson had no idea how useful his old ally would be. but Gloyd still had 50 kilos on most of the crew. No one would move against them while they stood together. No one would move alone, anyway. Corson looked back across the clearing at the mob. Ravelin was there now, huddled with Devore and Sela and a couple of junior officers. Devore spotted his brother watching and averted his gaze. Sela simply stared back at the commander, unabashed. Corson spat an epithet. Gloyd, we're dying here. I don't understand them. Yeah, you do, Gloyd said. You know what we say. You and me, we're about the job. Other Sith are about what's next. The Hook plucked a scaly root from the ground and sniffed it. Trouble is, this whole place is about what's next. We're trying to keep them together when you're trying to keep them together when you've really got to show them there's something after this rock. There's no time to win people over. You pick a path. Anybody won't walk it. Anybody won't walk it, push them off. Or no, I'm sorry, that's a question. Push him off? Corson grinned. It really wasn't his style. Gloyd returned the smile and sank his teeth into the root. Wincing comically, the gunnery chief excused himself. They wouldn't be living off the land, not this land anyway. Looking back at the teeming crowd, Corson found his eyes drifting up toward the dwindling tendril of smoke drifting from the heights above. Above. Gloyd was right. It was the only way. That is actually the end of that chapter. Pretty short. I think I'll go ahead and go right on into chapter 3 because, we're about 50% through the book. Or should I just finish it next time? What the heck? I'm going to do it now. The Massassi had died on the mountain. Corson had left at dawn with 3 bearers. The healthiest of the Massassi, each passing around the remaining air canister. It hadn't lasted, and neither had they. Whatever it was on this planet that didn't like Massassi existed up above as well as below. It was just as well, Corson thought, leaving the blood-colored corpses where they fell. He couldn't run Massassi. They were pliant and obedient warriors, but they answered to force, not words. A good Sith captain needed to use both, but Corson leaned more on the latter. It had made for a good career. Not down the mountain, though. Things were going to get worse. They already had. It had been cold in the night, chillier than he had expected from what seemed like an oceanic climate. Some of the heavily injured had failed from exposure or from lack of medical care. Later, some kind of animal, Gloyd described it to him as a 6-legged mammal, half-mouth, vaulted from a burrow and tore into one of the injured. It took 5 exhausted sentries to slay the beast. One of Devore's mining specialists cast a chunk of the creature's body into the campfire and sampled a piece. She vomited blood and died within heartbeats. He was glad he hadn't been awake for that. Whatever relief there was in knowing there was life on the planet ended right there. Omen's crew didn't number enough to sort out what was safe and what wasn't. They had to go home, regardless of the state of things with the ship. Corson looked up into the morning sky, now streaked more by cirrus clouds than smoke. He hadn't told the others about the thing that had struck the viewport during the descent. What had he seen? Another predator? Probably. There was no point in bringing it up. Everyone was scared enough, and fear led to anger. The Sith understood this. They made use of it, but uncontrolled, it wasn't doing them any good. The sun hadn't even set before lightsabers came out again in a dispute over a food pack. One less red Sith. Not 20 standard hours since the crash, and things were starting to get basic, tribal. Time had run out. Omen had come to a rest in a small indentation down a short ways on the other side of a crest. Sky and ocean spread out ahead. The ship had stopped on the incline just in time, and there wasn't a flat plane left on the vehicle. The sight of his ship shattered on the alien rocks moved Corson only a little. He had known opponents, mainly captains in the Republic, who were sentimental about their commands. It wasn't the Sith way. Omen was a tool like any other. A blaster, a lightsaber. to be used and discarded, and while the ship's resilience had saved his life, it had betrayed him first, not a thing to be forgiven. Still, it had a purpose. Flying again was out of the question, but the sight of the metal tower just above the bridge gave him hope. The receiver would find the Republic's hyperspace beacons in an instant, telling Corson his location, and the ship's transmitter would tell the Sith where to find Omen, and, more important, the Lignin. Maybe not in time for the engagement at Kirik, but Sato would want it nonetheless. Walking carefully over loose stones to the airlock, Corson tried not to think of the other possibility. If the Battle of Kirik was lost because Omen was lost, he would die. But he would die having completed his mission. A vial lay empty in Devor's open, quaking palm. What? Oh, a vial lay empty in Devor's open, quaking palm. Devor had somehow gotten to Omen first, and was sitting in the commander's chair. Well, slouching was more like it. I see your cabin's intact, Corson said. He remembered Sela returning to the living quarters for little Jared. In a fire, you go for the thing you love. I didn't go there first, Devor said, limply letting the vial drop to the deck beside the command chair. There was another container there, particles of glistening spice still beside it. He's been here a while, Corson guessed. He had a sneaking suspicion spice was why Devor had gone into mining in the first place. It had certainly shortened his naval career. I didn't go there. I wasn't first, Devor said, pointing vaguely to the ceiling. I went to look at the transmitter array. It wasn't first. Okay. Structure look good? From outside, maybe. Slouched in the command chair, Devor watched blankly as his brother clambered over fallen beams to reach the ladder. Above the ceiling panels, Corson saw what Devor must have seen, a melted mass of electronics, fried when a seam opened in the hull during the descent. The external transmitter stood all right, but as a monument to its former purpose, nothing more. Climbing down, Corson made his way to the comm control panel and pressed the button several times. Nothing. He sighed. The story was the same everywhere on the bridge. He switched the transmitter on one last time and stepped back over the debris. Omen was dead. But Sith had survived death before, and the guts of Omen still held enough spare parts to allow a transplant. His eyes darted to the hallway, surely in the workshop. Gone with the armory. The explosion had vented most of the stores into space. Devor buried his face in his hands, finished. Corson wasn't. The landing bay, the blades. The fighters had been in flight when Omen made its sudden departure, but something in the landing bay might be serviceable. Forget it, Yaru. The deck was crushed when we hit. I couldn't even get in there. Then we'll cut the ship down deck by deck and fabricate the parts we need. With what? Our lightsabers? Devor rose, steadying himself against the armrest. We're done. His cough became a laugh. The lignin crystals offered the Sith power, just not the kind to operate a distress beacon, a receiver, or even the celestial atlas. We are here, Yaru. We are here, and we are out of action, out of the war, out of everything. We're out of it. You're out of it. Corson climbed into a hallway and began rummaging through cabinets, looking for something that would help those below. Unfortunately, Omen had been outfitted for a deep space mission. Sith provisioners were sparing. No portable generators at all. Another comm compartment, clothes. That would help tonight, but they wouldn't be staying. We have to stay, Devor said, as if he read Corson's thought. What? We have to stay, Devor repeated, standing alone. A tombstone in the shadows of the hallway. He spoke with a voice that quaked. It's been 2 days. You don't understand. It's been 2 days. Corson didn't stop his search, passing in front of his brother to another door, jammed by the damage. It's been 2 days, Yaru. Nagasato will think we ran away, to take the lignin crystals for ourselves. He'll blame Says, Corson said, remembering. Nagasato hadn't fully trusted the fallen Jedi who captained the Harbinger. He'd asked Corson to keep an eye on Sayes, to report back, when he did, if he did. Corson fully intended to explain how the Harbinger had lost control, how the Harbinger had struck the Omen. With any luck, Sato had Harbinger already. Corson released the door handle. He hadn't seen what happened to Harbinger after the collision, but it was a safe bet that Sato would have the crippled Harbinger already. And Sayes, sitting there with only half the shipment of lignin crystals and unable to deliver, would be bargaining for his life, saying anything about the Omen. He would sing harmonies the kill would be proud of. Corson looked down the hallway. Back at Primus Golud on the station, you met with Sato, didn't you? DeVore shuffled. To discuss the lignin operation. You weren't discussing something else, like who should command this mission? DeVore glared at him with bloodshot eyes. That look again. You were discussing who should command this mission, Corson pressed, surprised at his own calm. What did you say when he said no? The commander's blood froze. He knew how things always went with DeVore, how things must have gone. Sato had rejected his half-brother, and DeVore had said something. What? Not enough to offend Sato, no. DeVore was still here in the wreck, drawing labored breaths, but Sato would have reason to suspect DeVore's loyalty, would have cause to wonder whether his crystals were safe. The one thing Yaru Corson had was his reputation for playing it straight, but now at a minimum Sato would know that Corson was not the absolute master of his own vessel, and if he wasn't, DeVore's hand shook and his lightsaber flew into it. The weapon that had killed Boyle Marcombe ignited in his hand. What did I tell you? Corson yelled, approaching him. Anyway, no games on my ship. Shaken, DeVore darted back toward the bridge. Corson followed. The only way we come out of this is if we're completely clean, DeVore. Sato can't think we did this on purpose. He reached the doorway. No games on my ship. Corson walked into a hurricane. DeVore stood atop the command chair, calling forth all the debris of the bridge like a deity on a mountaintop. Corson rolled, fragments of transparent steel raking his face and ripping into his uniform. Reaching Gloyd's station, he mounted his own defense, cocooning himself in the force against the onslaught. DeVore was as strong as any in his family, and now he was riding chemicals Corson didn't understand. A beam slammed against the bulkhead, and Omen shivered. A second strike, and the bridge tipped forward, knocking DeVore off his perch. Corson didn't let him get up again. The moment DeVore's head appeared behind the chair, Corson flung him out through the ruined viewport. He had to get this outside before everything was lost. Corson bolted uphill through the hallway to the airlock, huffing as he did, fighting a spice-crazed assailant on a teetering death trap. I must be the crazy one. The step down from the portal was now a leap. His boot sank into a soft patch as he hit, wrenching his ankle and sending him tumbling down the scree-covered slope. Biting his lip, he tried to clamber back from the brink toward Omen's crushed nose. A shadow was falling on him. He lit his lightsaber. Suddenly he saw it, or it saw him. Another winged creature, high over the near ridge, circling and watching him. Corson blinked sand from his eyes as the creature soared away. It was the same as the one from the descent, almost. The difference was... Thump! Corson felt himself lifted into the air, and before he could register what had happened, he slammed into the wreck of Omen. DeVore marched into view, pebbles rolling over him as if propelled by a magnet. Trapped against the crumbling frame, Corson struggled to stand. His father's familiar look was gone from DeVore's face, replaced by a bleak nothingness. It's over, Yaru, DeVore said, raising his lightsaber high. We should have done this before. It's been decided. I'm Commander Corson. It's been decided? The thought flashed through Corson's mind, even as the lightsaber flashed past his ear. It sparked against Omen's battered armor. The commander raised his weapon to parry the next stroke, and the next, and the next. Devore hammered away, no style, just fury. Corson found nowhere to go except along the side of the ship, sliding backward toward the port side torpedo tubes. 3 of the doors had been opened in the descent. The 4th... Corson spotted the control box, just like the one he'd remotely manipulated in the descent. He flexed toward it through the force and ducked. The firing pin activated, bulleting forward and catching Devore in the lightsaber shoulder. The torpedo door tried to cycle open, but pinned against the ground, it only dug into the strata, sending him a stream of rocks flooding beneath the ship. Omen lurched forward again, with Devore sliding in front of it toward the edge of the ocean below. It took a minute for Corson to get loose from the handhold he'd found on the ship, and another for the dust to clear. Finding Omen surprisingly still, he gingerly stepped away on the crushed slate. Omen's bow had impaled itself on a razor rise on the promontory just meters from the edge. Ahead of it, partially buried in rubble, lay his brother. His golden uniform shredded, his shoulder bloodied. Devore writhed on the precipice. He tried to kneel, shrugging off the surrounding rocks, only to collapse again. Devore still gripped his lightsaber. How he could still be holding on to it with the whole world falling down, Corson didn't know. The commander fastened his own lightsaber to his belt. "Yaru," Devore said. It was a whimper now. "Yaru, I can't see." His face was tear-stained, but intact. Then his lightsaber rolled free, plummeting out of sight over the cliff's edge, and revealing the oily pink stain on his hand. Red rage. That was what had been in the vials, Corson thought. That was what had given Devore his manic power, and that was what was stealing from him now. The shoulder wound wasn't bad, Corson saw, lifting his brother to his feet. Devore was young. With Sela tending to him, he might even survive out here, presuming he could live without the spice. But what then? What could be said that wasn't already said? It's been decided. A helpful hold became a tighter grip, and Yaru Corson turned his brother to face the setting sun over the ocean. "I will complete my mission," he said, looking over the side to the ocean yawning far below, "and I will protect my crew." He let go. He just threw his brother over the edge. Ho ho! Okay, so that is the end of the 3rd chapter. Wow. There's only one left to go, but I don't think I want to finish tonight. I will do that on Friday, I guess. This is Monday? Yeah, so I will do that on Friday. I'll finish it. We'll do our first short story on Wednesday. And if this is the way how short these books in this series are going to be, I might just do them in 2 sessions, do 2 chapters each, if they're all going to be 4. So I'll look at the next one ahead of time and find that out. All right. I will end this session, and I'll see you all in a little bit for some Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl. How do I do? Let's see. Still working on those hotkeys.